Hello and welcome to Budos. If you're wondering why I tend to move the camera straight away when I am starting a video, it's because I tend to start before I know what the hell I'm doing. I click record and then I realise that the camera's not quite right, so I should probably learn to actually prepare. But I can't be bothered. So, today's title is something along the lines of Jeffrey Dahmer, as you can tell, because you know the title. I don't, you do. Yeah, so Budos. I figured I'd do it on this Budos channel because it's kind of most relevant to this channel in a way. This is concerning the shadow and owning your own personal shadow. And I just want to kind of discuss Jeffrey Dahmer, not necessarily in the context of the shadow straight away, but I might come on to that. So I just want to discuss my general thoughts and feelings about this bizarre, gross, disgusting, yet strangely adorable person. So let me tell you the story about how I even came to find out about this person. So Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer. There you go. Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer between the years of I literally just read it and then I've changed the webpage that I was on. He killed 17 gay men, homosexual men, between the years of something and something. I think it was like between the years of. Let me look it up. Jeffrey Dahmer. Come on now. Oh god. So this guy is a gross. He's like utterly gross. 1978 to 1991. Let me just read the first bit of the Wikipedia thing. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, born May the 21st, 1960, died November 28th, 1994. Also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who committed the rape, murder, and dismemberment of 17 men and boys from 1978 to 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, which is a sexual attraction or sexual act involving corpses. Oh. So many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts. When you read about what he did, I'll tell you a bit about what he did. So let's read this sentence again. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, typically all or part of the skeleton. But also, he preserved like at least one, maybe more, of these men's penises. And he kept the bicep of one of the blokes because he really liked that bit the best and preserved it. And so, oh god, it was so horrible. It's really gross. So it says here, although diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, Dahmer was found to be legally sane at his trial. But it turned out that the way that they classified sanity at that point was he aware that he was committing a crime, and was he capable of rational thought, basically, something like that. Yeah, convicted of 15 of the 16 murders he had committed in Wisconsin, Dahmer was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment on February the 15th, 1992. He was later sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment He was later sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment for an additional homicide committed in Ohio in 1978. But that's his first one, I think. On November 28th, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution. Right, that's a brief overview. Oh, it's so gross. Necrophilia, cannibalism, permanent preservation of body parts. This guy, right, when they found him, when they caught him, right, they showed, the police got some tip off from someone who managed to escape and like escape from being killed by him, basically, and went and told the police, and the police busted in on him, right? And they found like fridges full of body parts. They found like drawers full of skeletons. Right, this is so fucked up. He was apparently trying, like, he'd killed 17 people by this point when he got caught, and he was trying to create a throne out of the skeletons. So he was like some kind of death king, you know, some evil sorcerer death king. And some of the things he said was like he was eating the body parts because he felt like he was absorbing the power of the person by eating them, and like it would make him more attractive and more powerful and stuff. And so it's incredibly bizarre. Like his reasons. So let's have a look. Just another little bit of stuff here. So I'm just going to try and tell you the bit where they catch him. Arrest. On July 22nd, 1991, Dahmer approached 3 men with an offer of $100 to accompany him to his apartment to pose for nude photographs. So this was something that he would do. Why am I laughing? It's horrible. It's like, it's possibly the worst set of things I have ever heard of a human being doing. This is about the shadow, coming up to the shadow now. Jeffrey Dahmer represents all the things that I think a human being could ever possibly do that are the worst possible things a human being could ever do. It's like all of my fears of humanity and all of my worst projections of humanity's despicableness is all summarized in this one person. So he is the complete and total anti-self. My complete and total anti-self, as in the person who I would least like to be in the world. Yeah, so he is like the complete epitome of my shadow. So because I have fears of homosexuality, I have fears of rape, as in being a rapist, I have fears of being a murderer, I have fears of cannibalism, I have fear that, you know, necrophilia is like the most disgusting thing I can think of. Yeah, necrophilia and cannibalism are the most disgusting things I can think of. Yeah, so there's that, and there's a paedophilic element in it as well. So it's like every fear and sense of disgust and despicableness and horror and grossness that I could ever think of is like reduced into this one person. So carry on. So on July 22nd, 1991, Dahmer approached 3 men with an offer of $100 to accompany him to his apartment to pose for news photographs, drink beer, and simply keep him company. One of the trio, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards, agreed to accompany him to his apartment. Upon entering Dahmer's apartment, Edwards noticed a foul odour and several boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor, which Dahmer claimed to use for cleaning bricks. It's so disgusting, isn't it? Like, so this guy is dissolving some of the body parts in acid, keeping some of them in the fridge, eating some of them, and then like keeping the skeletons to create a death throne. It's just, it's so, I don't know. It's so, it's just like a depraved, the most disgusting horror movie actually happening in real life. It's I can't think of anything worse. And yet there's part of me that kind of understands him in a way. There's part of me that says that he's a human being, and a part of me that sympathizes, or I can understand him in a way. Like, I see him as a child who just wants to get what he wants. He's just like it's like he's a 6-year-old basically. I see him as a 6-year-old, and he's never been told, no, you're not allowed to kill anyone and eat them and shag them, and like, he just like, I just feel like doing it. That's how I see him, and it's absolutely horrible, and it's disturbing for me to understand this person, and to go, you're gross. Like, I just imagine if I was sat there, I'd be like, you're the gross. I'd want to punch and kill him, obviously. But then there's part of me that would go, I kind of know, I understand why you're doing this. You're just doing it because you've, like, no one stopped you, aren't you? You're just doing it because that's how you felt and that's what you wanted to do, and no one said, oh, you can't do that, by the way. You'll get arrested for that. And he's doing it. Yeah, that's how I see him anyway, as this kind of just, he's an idiot. He's a disgusting idiot. He's just an innocently idiotic, horrible person. but there's a sense of real, like, childlikeness to him, which is why I think it's odd. It's very odd how I can sympathise with this person, yet he is the most disgusting. He committed the most disgusting things I have ever heard of. And he's fascinating as well. He's completely fascinating. The whole story is fascinating because of how disgusting it is. I've never heard of anything so disgusting. And yeah, so you just how can you actually do it though? I mean, I understand why, but how could you actually ever bring yourself to do that? Like, you have to be able to switch some mega parts of your brain off to be able to do that, surely. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so ugh, it's gross. And something else about Jeffrey Dahmer is the focus is always placed on him in all the writing about him, right? So it's very much about him and his motivations, and not much, if anything, is placed on seeing this from the perspective of the families of the people who he killed. So we don't hear about the victims' lives beforehand. We don't hear about how the families were affected by the deaths of those people. So in a way, I think one of the reasons why the Jeffrey Dahmer thing is don't know. One of the reasons why I don't get the full sense of how disgusting it was, because we only ever hear it kind of from his perspective. We only ever hear about what he did, and it from that perspective. So we see it through his eyes, basically, and we don't ever see it through the victim's eyes. And I think to see it through the victim's eyes as going through that experience of being murdered by someone, and like, if you imagine watching that take place, like a fly on the wall, watching that stuff happening, then you get the full effect of this disgusting thing. But I think I don't know, it's weird because all the writing about serial killers in general focuses on trying to understand that person. They don't try to understand the whole situation of, like, well, yes, it's fascinating to be interested in the depravities of humankind, but think about how that impacts the people around that, and the people who are killed, and the family, and the wider society. You know, it's like the serial killers are always focused on in isolation almost, and the victims become just a number of how many people they killed and in what way they were killed and stuff like this. So we're not humanizing the victims, we over monsterize the killer as well, without realizing that they're a human being at the same time as being a monster. So they're a monster, yes, and they're a human being at the same time. So it's very difficult for us to deal with that. So part of this, why I'm even doing this, is it's like a way to confront my shadow by reading about this stuff and going, oh God. Because if you can't see the humanity in the worst person in the world, then you can't see the humanity of humanity in total, if that makes sense. Because these traits exist in other people, in everyone, in a way less concentrated doses, and they just show up in different people very, very strongly. So, for example, thinking about Jeffrey Dahmer as a cannibal got me thinking about eating meat again, and what's the difference between Jeffrey Dahmer eating someone's leg and me eating a cow's leg for a steak, or for I don't know what cow's leg would be in, some stew or whatever. And it's like, well, it's pretty gross. Both of them are gross, when you think about it. It's still meat. They're both meats. It's like, oh, gross. And so how do I feel okay about eating a cow's leg that's been murdered, and like I wouldn't feel okay? I feel disgusted by Jeffrey Dahmer eating another person's leg, so it's only because it's a human being that I feel okay with eating a cow. I mean, that's a whole big thing. Yeah, it's really tough stuff. Anyway, so one of the trio that Jeffrey Dahmer approached with $100 to accompany him to his apartment was called Tracy Edwards, and he agreed to accompany Jeffrey Dahmer to his apartment. Upon entering Dahmer's apartment, Edwards noticed a foul odor, and several boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor. Oh, God. Which Dahmer claimed to use for cleaning bricks. After some minor conversation, Edwards responded to Dahmer's request to turn his head and view his tropical fish, whereupon Dahmer placed a handcuff on his wrist. When Edwards asked what's happening, Dahmer unsuccessfully attempted to cuff his wrists together, then told Edwards to accompany him to the bedroom to pose for nude pictures. While inside the bedroom, Edwards noted nude male posters on the wall, and that a videotape of The Exorcist 3 was playing. He also noted a blue 57-gallon drum in the corner from which a strong odour emanated. So Jeffrey Dahmer was using that drum to mulch people down, basically. Dahmer then brandished a knife and informed Edwards he intended to take nude pictures of him. In an attempt to appease Dahmer, Edwards unbuttoned his shirt, saying he would allow him to... This is an amazing film. This part here is a film in itself. Just this, however long this was in time, like an hour or 2 hours or something, this is a film right here. Like, forget the rest of Jeffrey Dahmer's life. This is a concentrated film right here. Dahmer then brandished a knife, so he did that. He opened his shirt. Okay. So Dahmer brandished a knife and informed Edwards he intended to take nude pictures of him. In an attempt to appease Dahmer, Edwards unbuttoned his shirt, saying he would allow him to do so if he would remove the handcuffs and put the knife away. In response to this promise, Dahmer simply turned his attention towards the TV. Edwards observed Dahmer rocking back and forth and chanting before turning his attention back to him. He placed his head on Edwards' chest, listened to his heartbeat, and with the knife pressed against his intended victim, informed Edwards he intended to eat his heart. Sounds great as a film, but this is something that really happened. In continuous attempts to prevent Dahmer from attacking him, Edwards repeated that he was Dahmer's friend and that he was not going to run away. Edwards had decided he was going to either jump from a window or run through the unlocked front door upon the next available opportunity. When Edwards next stated he needed to use the bathroom, he asked if they could sit with a beer in the living room, where there was air conditioning, to which Dahmer consented, and the pair walked to the living room when Edwards exited the bathroom. Okay. Inside the living room, Edwards waited until he observed Dahmer have a momentary lapse of concentration before requesting to use the bathroom again. When Edwards rose from the couch, he noted Dahmer was not holding the handcuffs, whereupon Edwards punched him in the face, knocking Dahmer off balance and ran out the door. At 11:30 p.m. on July 22nd, Edwards flagged down. Yes, this is the same night. Edwards flagged down 2 Milwaukee police officers at the corner of North 25th Street. The officers noted Edwards had a handcuff attached to his wrist, whereupon Edwards explained to the officers that a freak had placed the handcuffs upon him and asked if the police could remove them. When the officers' handcuff keys failed to fit the brand of handcuffs, Edwards agreed to accompany the officers to the apartment, where Edwards stated he had spent the previous 5 hours before escaping. When the officers and Edwards arrived at apartment 213, Dahmer invited the trio inside and acknowledged he had indeed placed the handcuffs upon Edwards, although he offered no explanation as to why he had done so. At this point, Edwards divulged to the officers that Dahmer had also brandished a large knife upon him, and that this had happened in the bedroom. Dahmer made no comment to this revelation, indicating to one of the officers, Rolf Mueller, that the key to the handcuffs was in his bedside dresser in the bedroom. As Mueller entered the bedroom, Dahmer attempted to pass Mueller to himself retrieve the key. So Dahmer attempted to pass Mueller to be able to receive the key. So he tried to go past the police officer in order to retrieve the key himself, whereupon the second officer present, Robert Routh, informed him to back off. In the bedroom, Mueller noted there was indeed a large knife beneath the bed. He also saw an open drawer, which upon closer inspection contained scores of Polaroid pictures, many of which were of human bodies in various stages of dismemberment. God. I took pictures as well. Mueller noted the decor indicated that they had been taken in the very apartment in which they were standing. Can you imagine that as a police officer walking into someone's apartment, finding pictures of bodies in various stages of dismemberment and realizing that they were taken in this exact apartment, and you're like looking at a killer basically right there? Like, what the fuck? Okay. Mueller noted the decor had been, indicated they had been taken in the very apartment in which they were standing. He walked into the living room to show them to his partner, uttering the words, "These are for real." When Dahmer saw that Mueller was holding several of his Polaroids, he fought with the officers in an effort to resist arrest. The officers quickly overpowered him, cuffed his hands behind his back, and called a second squad car for backup. At this point, Mueller opened the refrigerator to reveal the freshly severed head of a black male on the bottom shelf. See, this kind of stuff really puts in context violent films. Like I just saw The Predator yesterday, where there's severing of heads all over the place. Right. As Dahmer lay pinned on the floor beneath Ruth Ralph, he turned his head towards the officers and muttered the words, "For what I did, I should be dead." A more detailed search of the apartment conducted by the Criminal Investigation Bureau revealed a total of 4 severed heads in Dahmer's kitchen. A total of 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached, were found in Dahmer's bedroom and inside a closet. In addition, investigators discovered collected blood drippings upon a tray at the bottom of Dahmer's refrigerator, plus 2 human hearts and a portion of arm muscle, each wrapped inside plastic bags upon the shelves. In Dahmer's freezer, investigators discovered an entire torso. Oh, God. This guy gets grosser and grosser. I mean, I can understand the guy's motivation as being very, like, a very, very stuck child, but the actual things he did are absolutely horrific and disgusting. An entire torso, plus a bag of fascinating as well. Like, what? How has this happened in humanity that this has actually happened? So, plus a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom. Oh, God, fucking hell. Oh. I don't know how these officers. I mean, the smell. Oh, God. Flesh, human flesh, bag of human organs, and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom of the freezer. Elsewhere in apartment 213, great, investigators discovered 2 entire skeletons. A pair of severed hands. Well, if you're gonna have the hands, you got to have a pair, haven't you? A pair of severed hands. 2 severed and preserved penises. Oh, God. That's a point, actually. Did he sever them and preserve them when they were bona fide? Or did he? Because no, that's a good point in a way. Disgusting point. But why preserve a floppy penis? What can you do with that? I presume he's doing random shit with them. Maybe he's dildoing himself with frozen penis. Who knows? It's disgusting. A mummified scalp. A mummified scalp. We mummified a scalp. What's a scalp? Oh, mummified. A scalp. It's gross. And in the 57-gallon drum, 3 further dismembered torsos dissolving in the acid solution. A total of 74 Polaroid pictures detailing the dismemberment of Dahmer's victims were found. In reference to the recovery of body parts and artifacts at 924 North 25th Street. What? Maybe that was the apartment block, but not the apartment number. In reference to the recovery of body parts and artifacts at 924 North 25th Street, the chief medical examiner later stated it was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene. He then it gave a full confession, basically, which I think was good. So that's the final bit. So when asked in a... Hold on, let's just read this last bit. Right. Describing the increase in his rate of killing in the 2 months prior to his arrest, he stated he had been completely swept along. It makes it sound so innocent, doesn't it? With his compulsion to kill, adding, "It was an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever cost. Someone good-looking, really nice-looking. It just filled my thoughts all day long." When asked as to why he had preserved a total of 7 skulls and the entire skeletons of 2 victims, Dahmer stated he had been in the process of constructing a private altar of victims' skulls. It's like, it's like this is what happens when a person is completely and utterly insane and has no concept of any law at all, like no law of human interaction or decency or law, crime and punishment type of thing, and he's just entertaining his every single imaginative fantasy and acting it out in real life. It's just like it's like the equivalent of a child playing with their little cars on the floor, but instead he's playing with people's lives, dismembering their torsos and boiling them in acid, and like it's like he's like a little child playing with this disgraceful, disgusting, horrible, like, yeah, it's like he's a little child demon inside a human body, like a little child demon going inside a human body. It's not only disgusting and disgraceful and horrible and abominable, it's also incredibly bizarre as well. Like, how did this happen? And also, look what there's such a grandiosity to it as well. Like, he was completely swept along with his compulsion to kill. And Dahmer, why had he preserved a total of 7 skulls and the entire skeletons of 2 victims? Dahmer stated he had been in the process of constructing a private altar of victims' skulls. It's like he thinks himself to be some kind of magical death sorcerer. You know, he's like a cartoon sorcerer person. It's bizarre. So he's constructing a private altar of victims' skulls, which he had intended to adorn upon the black table located in his living room. So he's going to make a little altar of skulls, right, upon the black table located in his living room, and upon which he had photographed the bodies of many of his victims. It's disgusting. This display of skulls was to be adorned at each side with the complete skeletons of Ernest Miller and Oliver Lacey. Oh, God, this person. The 4 severed heads found in his kitchen were to be removed of all flesh and used in this altar, as was the skull of at least one future victim. So he was trying to get what? So how many skulls was he trying to get? So he'd already got 7 skulls, right? He got 4 severed heads, so that makes 11. So he wanted 12 skulls. Presumably that's a magic power number. 12 skulls. I need 12 skulls. The 4 severed heads found in his kitchen were to be removed of all flesh and used in this altar, as was the skull of at least one future victim. Right, so he's going to get 12 skulls, 2 skeletons. I mean, it's like the most disgusting shopping list ever, isn't it? Incense sticks were to be placed at each end of the black table, right, above which Dahmer intended to place a large blue lamp with he's decorating his apartment with skulls and skeletons and incense. So, just doing a bit of decorating. Yeah, had to kill 17 people to do this. So basically, what this amounts to is Jeffrey Dahmer is just trying to spruce up his apartment a little bit, going about it in a very roundabout way and killing half of the local area. Right, I don't know how I'm making fun of this disgusting person, but I am trying my best. The entire construction, Right, so he's going to have all the skulls on the table, two skeletons by the side. It's like a scene out of a comic book, isn't it? Like, incense sticks were to be placed at each end of the black table, above which Dahmer intended to place a large blue lamp with extending blue globe lights. That's beautiful. The entire construction was to be placed before a window covered with a black opaque shower curtain, in front of which Dahmer intended to sit. This is the best part. I mean, it's a disgusting thing. I want to reiterate that, but the magic of the whole thing. So he wanted to create this table, his altar thing with the incense and the blue lights, and he wants to sit in front of it in a black leather chair, like the master of the universe or the master of death. And he says, when asked in a November 18th, 1991 interview who the altar was dedicated to, Dahmer replied, "Myself. It was a place where I could feel at home. Ah, finally I get to rest." It's like Thanos. It's very much like Thanos. In the comic books, I mean. Well, a little bit like that. Not really like that in the Marvel film, the Infinity War film, but from what I understand of the comics, I've not actually read it, but in the Infinity Gauntlet series, Thanos is trying to court death, the goddess of death, basically, and by killing loads of people. It sounds very much like Jeffrey Dahmer here. And so he says it's dedicated to himself. It was a place where I could feel at home, because obviously Thanos just wants to rest once he's done his killing. He wants to rest. So Jeffrey Dahmer further described his intended altar as a place for meditation, from where he believed he could draw a sense of power, adding, if this, his arrest, had happened 6 months later, that's what they would have found. It's almost a shame, in a way, that you don't get to see the full thing. Oh. So he's going to kill one more person, get another skull on there, have his whole table laid out, incense, skeletons either side, with the blue light above it, black shower curtain so no one can see it in, and then sit in a leather chair and meditate, drawing a sense of power from his... It's disgusting! It's disgusting! You know, as a set of... as a, like, comic book thing, like, as a pretend make-believe thing, it's kind of fascinating. But then you realise, no, this actually happened. This was actually a person. He actually killed actual people. People actually went through a horrendous traumatic death before having their dead bodies dismembered, put in a fridge or boiled in acid, or dissolved in acid, sorry. I mean, this is a real thing that actually happened. I mean, it's so bizarre that it's unbelievable. It's like when you actually imagine into that scenario, and you're not conceptualizing it, but you imagine actually sort of being there or looking at it and going, what the fuck? You know, not just like, oh, this is just like some imaginary, like, it sounds just like a story from a grotesque novel, or you know, like a fictional horror novel, doesn't it? But then you realise, no, this actually happened. Yeah, it's disgusting. So he was charged and found guilty and found to be legally sane, and he, oh god, and all the sexual stuff he did with the corpses, I just don't even want to go into that because I maybe will throw up. And I'm conscious of the time as well. Okay, so he was imprisoned, serving loads of life sentences, and then he got beaten to death by one of his inmates, basically. Which I think is good. I think that's a fitting end for him, really. Yeah. He'd previously converted to Christianity, and became a born-again Christian, as it says. And yeah, so he says here, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behaviour to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. So he just didn't care. It's like utter nihilism type of thing. And complete lawlessness with regard to human interaction, a complete sense of isolation from humanity, basically, almost believing himself to be a godlike entity. Yeah, that's how I can see that. Yeah, and then he gets caught, and they find all his gross stuff, and that's it. So that is, for me personally, something that touches upon every possible horrendous. He even tried to make them into zombies. He tried to make a few of his victims into zombies. But then this is ridiculous. This is that, you know what I say? It's like a child. It's like a child experimenting. It's like a child experimenting with, like, just playing around with stuff and saying, "Oh, maybe I can make a zombie." You know, that's how I can sort of intuitively understand him, because in a way, the same sorts of principles apply to lots of people's lives. You know, you want something, you go out and get it, and you do the things you need to do in order to get it. But this is just in a horrific, gruesome direction. So in the same way that someone might go out and decide to, like, build a family and have a house and get a dog and a car and do the things they need to do to get it, this person goes, right, I want to get 2 skeletons, I want to get 2 penises, you know. Like, oh my god, oh god. I want to get a table with 12 skulls on it, you know. Get a leather chair there. I'll put the light over that, yeah, and then I can chill, and that's my life dream. Yeah, I'll get that. When I've got that, then I'll just turn to gardening. You know, it's like, I understand it in a way, and it's like, I don't know. It's so, it's such a strange one. Like, most of the time, when I read about serial killers, it's very hard for me to see them as a human being. But this person, I can see them as a human being, as well as the horrific monster. So that's why it's fascinating. And it's just, the story is so bizarre. Many of Dahmer's victims killed in 1991 had holes bored into their skulls, through which Dahmer injected hydrochloric acid or later boiling water directly into the brain in an attempt to render a permanent submissive unresistant state. On at least 3 occasions this proved fatal, although on none of these occasions this was Dahmer's intention. So he killed these people by accident, and it's because he said later that he was trying to make these people into zombies so that he could do with them whatever they liked, but they were still alive. So he would rather have them alive, and then he can do all his dirty, disgusting, depraved shit with them, but keep them alive, and just so that they couldn't resist him. As it says, he wanted to render them in a permanent, submissive, unresistant state. So he tried to make zombies. I mean, what the fuck? You don't hear that much, do you, in your serial killer genre? Most people are just in there for the kill and the thrill of the kill, but this person just like, I'll just do everything. Zombies. It's just, I don't know what to do with this, with the information. It's like reading a comic book of some evil demon from the Marvel universe of some kind, you know. Yeah, or like some mythical kind of horrific demon being that you'd hear in a story from one of the pits of hell or something, you know. It's like that. And then again, so if you read all this stuff, you're beguiled by this person and trying to understand his mentality, and there's not anything about the victims, and you must think, well, that must be how Jeffrey Dahmer's mind operated in that sense, because he didn't care at all about the victims, obviously, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to do that stuff. So the story itself, the way it's presented to us as a reader, shows just how much like callousness was contained within this person, because hardly anything is said from the victim's perspective. So it's weird because I can't even fully comprehend the impact of it without having to. You then imagine yourself as like, okay, imagine if I encountered Jeffrey Dahmer and I went along with him for whatever reason, and I was one of those victims, and then you walk yourself through that step, right, of like what the fear that the victims must have gone through, the horror, the terror, the pain, yeah, and it's horrendous. And then you think about the families of those people who were killed, and you think of like how they were affected by their sons and brothers and cousins or whatever, the people who died, how the families were affected by that, and how they must have felt. And imagine yourself being a family member of someone who's been killed not just killed in any old way, but killed in a very grotesque way, and then their skeleton or their skull or their penis or their arm or their whole torso has been preserved. And think of how, as a family member of like a victim who has died and has had those things done to their corpse, think how that would affect you. Because, reading this stuff, it doesn't humanize the situation overall. It doesn't humanize the victims. It doesn't humanize that. It paints the whole thing in a very comic book like way. So, you just get this sense of a grotesque monster, basically a grotesque monster of a human being, and yeah, and so you can't fully confront it. In order to confront that as part of an occurrence that happened in humanity, you have to know everything that related to that. So you have to know everything about the victims. You have to understand that experience of those victims. You have to understand the families. You have to understand the impact it had to the wider community. You have to understand it from the police officers' point of view as well when they find this stuff. You have to see it from the point of view of the judge and the jury who are hearing this case, and you have to then think about Jeffrey Dahmer's family as well, how they were affected by it, and the wider influence of people who knew him, how they were affected by it. Yeah, if that makes sense. And then you have to understand the prison system, and Jeffrey Dahmer involved in the prison system, and it's like there's so much missing to really bring about a full understanding of the impact of such depravity and such disgraceful action. And it's almost like you could think, oh well, that's just implied by how gruesome the story is. But you have to really work at that aspect of it. You have to think of that intentionally to generate. Well, it's kind of you confronting the horrible aspects of humanity when you do something like this. So you could say I did this as an exercise in like owning and confronting my shadow, because this person represents everything that could possibly ever go wrong about me. Like, these are the worst things that a human being could ever do. So if you relate that personally, you're a human being. These are the worst possible things that I believe I could do as a human being. Yeah, and very disgusting, isn't it? Very disgusting to realise that this is a human being who did this. This is not a demon. Not actually a demon, it's a person. It's a human person who did this. So I don't really have a message as such. I just wanted to discuss it because it does relate to the shadow, because it's almost to the point where it's, as I say, a comic book description of a horror story. And if you want to confront your own shadow, then you can do something whereby you find an example of the most heinous person to your psyche, because other people are going to have a different description of heinousness. That was a very personal one for me. Like that touches on all my trigger points. Everything I have ever considered disgusting is summarized in that person. Jesus Christ. Yeah, and so you by reading it, it brings that up inside you. It brings up all your fears, and it brings up that sense of, oh God, for me it was the possibility that I could have that propensity inside me, or that could be a possibility for me. That was the real fear. It's a sense of self that could be associated with stuff. It's fine if it's a monster outside over there, in some far-flung place that did all this stuff, and I can just feel horrified by it, and it's like, okay, but it's never going to happen to me. I'm never going to be a victim of that, and I would never do anything like that, and I can keep it safe. But then you have to face that there was anyway a fear of the badness of my own self. Yeah, so it's a confronting of the fear of my own badness, confronting my own sense of badness, that there's part of me that feels somehow that I'm a bad person, or that I could be dangerous, I could be a bad person, I have the potential to be bad. That's the shadow. I have the potential to do bad things. And what's the real difference between me occasionally squishing a mosquito and Jeffrey Dahmer killing 17 people? All right, there's a big difference, all right, but it's one of degree, really, because still killing a mosquito is still killing an animal. It's killing a sentient being. It's killing a being, isn't it? It's because why do I kill mosquitoes? Because they're going to eat my blood. So it's kind of like dog eat dog. You try to eat me, I squish you. Yeah, but then that's still part of the same thing, isn't it? It's still a killing. It's still an impulse to squish. So yeah, confronting that. But I feel like personally, this is a culmination in the confronting of my inner shadow, because I've always been afraid to learn about serial killers because it would trigger off my fears, basically. And this time I did it in a very slow way, because knowing that this is going to trigger my fears, I had to process the things that I was seeing, and took a lot of time to, in between learning things, I'd learn a little bit and I'd go, and then I'd learn a little bit more, and the learning of it kind of, in a way, it healed my own fears of myself, because I realized, okay, although I can see his humanity, I don't condone anything he did, I can still see his humanity, and I can see that I'm very, very different from him. And one of the fears that I used to have when I was younger, like when I was 18 or something, some strange paranoia thing entered my mind after I watched the film Silence of the Lambs. A paranoia entered my mind of seeing a similarity between me and Hannibal Lecter, because he was an intelligent person and I'd always been an intelligent person. So because of that similarity, I then had this dreadful fear that because I had this one similarity with Hannibal Lecter, that I might become a Hannibal, or I was destined to become a Hannibal. It was a bizarre, grandiose, paranoid fear about my potential badness, basically. And that wreaked havoc with my brain. To be in constant fear of your potential destiny to be a cannibal was it provoked my anxiety for many years, and I had these horrible thought trains in my head where I was trying to like deal with the fact that I was afraid of myself. Basically, I was afraid of myself. So this learning about this despicable human being really helped me to confront those parts of myself, so to confront the fears I have about myself, and to confront the fears I have about other people, to confront my fear of death, to confront my sense of disgust about these things, and as I say, I did it in a very sensible way so that I never overstimulated myself, basically. Because back when I was 18, just watching Silence of the Lambs once was enough to provoke anxiety for about 7 years, on and off. So I was like, right, okay, I'm just going to learn a little bit about it, and I'm going to confront the feelings that it brings up. So this was a shadow exercise, confronting the feelings that this horrible stuff provokes, and then processing it, and to remove and to heal. So to remove the sense of fear of myself, and also to remove any self-beliefs that say I might be like this person. The only way I'm like this person is that he was alive and I am alive. He was a man and I am a man. He was a human being and I am a human being. That's about it. Yeah. Because one of the problems that I had with my shadow fears, all my fears were about similarity with despicable people. And I was like, oh God, I basically had this horrible, deep fear and deep sense that I was a bad person. And that was manifesting in these fearful thoughts about potentially being a murderer and stuff like this. Okay, so if there's any teaching point to be gained from this, if you get to a point where you feel emotionally resilient and you're aware that you have certain fears that you need to confront, then really, make sure you've gone through a long period of healing before you attempt this, because it could set off all kinds of long, like, latent fears about yourself and life and stuff, and it could traumatize you just by learning about your deepest fears. But you can use this kind of reading therapy, if you like, to confront fears of yourself or to confront fears of others, and to dissolve your fears. So for example, one thing, let's say you're like afraid of spiders. One thing, that's part of your shadow self. You have a shadow self that is afraid of spiders. You have a part of you that is a self that is afraid of spiders, because you're not always afraid of spiders. You're only afraid of them when a spider is there, right? So when you're doing something else, that self, that part of you, is not activated. But when it is activated, it's very activated. Yeah, so what you can do, for example, is you can do like a confronting of that shadow aspect of yourself, the fear of what is essentially an irrational fear, because most spiders are not dangerous to humans at all. So the fear is an inappropriate response. It's an unreasonable response, really. It's and an uncontrollable response for most people who are arachnophobic. And what you can do, for example, in that case, if you want to do it in this way, for example, you could start by just reading like one sentence about a spider, and then see what feelings it brings up in you, and then deal with those feelings just from reading that one little sentence about a spider. Or to look at a tiny picture of a spider, like way over there in the distance, and see what feelings that brings up in you, and deal with those feelings and process those feelings. You know, whether you talk about them or write about them, or you just feel them internally. And then what you do is you bring up these feelings of fear and then you feel them, and you put your attention into them, or you release them by expressing them, and they dissolve. So you slowly dissolve your fears of the outside world, or other people, or yourself, or whatever it happens to be. So that is a shadow exercise. Title has now come into clarity for me. Jeffrey Dahmer, a shadow exercise. Thanks for watching. I should have put a disclaimer. Warning! Not good to put it at the end, is it? Warning, contains disgusting, sensitive, gross, horrific information. Have a good night, or morning, or day, or whenever you watch this. See you later. Goodbye.